Okay, so the show is back up. My stuff is back up. The computer is repaired. I mean, it was kind of a disaster. Um, lessons learned. Y'all make sure you back up your stuff twice in multiple places to the cloud and locally, because you never know. I thought I was on top of it. I consider myself to be relatively tech savvy. And yet I was just so busy going and doing that I forgot to do some of the things to take care of my files and my product and my production. Um, but luckily for me, the files are saved. So here we are, episode 3, finally coming out with Janet Barrett, whose author of Stop the Break is an exploration of how to stop and the cycle of the mental abuse we heap on ourselves, that we do to ourselves as a result of our conditioning, our training, our upbringing, um, and to discover our emotional core, um, and how by abdicating responsibility for that, we can wind up miles and miles and years down the road waking up one day only realize it just to realize that how did we get here, what's happening with my life, what's happening with my marriage, what's happening with my family, what's happening with my emotions. A lot of us learn coping skills and coping mechanisms that do not serve us, and it's no one's fault in particular, but it is our responsibility to do better for ourselves. And this book and what Janet is trying to do to help us is to find out how to have a better relationship with ourselves and our emotions, and to begin to bring those things to the surface and allow them to guide us, which is what the Fearless Road also does, which is, I hope, provides some way of guiding us down our road to success as entrepreneurs, authors, business people, just in life in general. Um, because we can get lost, in the minutia. We can get lost in the busyness of life. We can get lost with our children and our families and work and our efforts and our businesses and stuff, and forget that taking care of ourselves emotionally is crucial to our well-being and to our success as humans on this planet, having an amazing experience, hopefully. Yeah, so episode 3, Emotional Armor with Janet Barrett. Let's get into this. Let's armor up and stay fearless. Okay? All right. See you guys later. So let's see. We are going to start with, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to all my lovely listeners to the Fearless Road podcast. Thanks for joining us today, giving us your time, your attention, your lovely ears. I think they're lovely. I hope they're lovely. I'm sure they are. If they're like mine, they're super tiny and small, because that's what I got from my mama, was teeny ears, but I can hear really well. So that's a good thing. Don't let it fool you. So on today's show, we have an incredible guest. I'm very excited to be sharing our fearless journey with, to be looking at and exploring some of the things that she's been writing about as an author. Our guest, Janet Barrett, the proactive and mental health advocate, speaker, and writer. She is the founder and CEO of Cerebral Health, a company focused on eliminating the stigma around mental health and helping individuals learn to thrive. Her new book, by the way, Stop the Break, which is out on Amazon, you can get it right now, takes readers on a journey to help them learn how to be proactive in their own mental health and on their mental health journey, their fearless road. And today she's going to talk about her particular journey on a fearless road, and she's going to share with us what she's learned about not just stopping and surviving, but beginning to thrive. So, welcome,
Thank you.
Janet Barrett. That's where we do this. I don't know if I'm going to put applause in here, but ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure people are applauding
Of
like crazy
course.
out there. So
Of
I
course
can
they
feel them
are. I mean, why
right
wouldn't they?
now. Um, from surviving to thriving. I mean, this is one of the things that I think most of us, hopefully a lot of us, find out where we discover that that's what's happening. We discover that we've been spending the majority of our life just surviving, that all the tactics and all of the methods and all of the things and skill sets and experiences that we seem to have accumulated that have allowed us to just sort of put it on cruise control and manage things, suddenly we realize, oh my God, we're just surviving. We're not thriving anymore. We're not, chasing the dream. We're just sitting back and kind of cruising, which, by the way, I thought that that's what I wanted. I thought that's what I deserved, was to relax a little bit, right? And take my foot off the pedal for a minute and enjoy some of the fruits of my particular labors, when I discovered that's not where my happiness lies.
I totally understand. Absolutely. And I feel like so many people do feel like they just have to push through and keep going and not really focus on what they deserve and what they should be able to get out of life.
So, a little background on you. I know that we did this beautiful intro and everything, but do you want to give the audience a little bit more of a, I don't know, take us back a little bit and share with us a little bit more about yourself and your journey, specifically as an entrepreneur, of course, but in your personal life too, which I know has a lot of extra, there's a lot of stuff to unpack there. So,
I am extra.
I'm sure we'll get into it, but
I am extra. I will absolutely take that moniker. No problem.
own
I
that.
own it.
Extra right here.
So I found myself a few years ago in what I like to think of as kind of the second stage of my adult life. So my first
Yes.
stage is what I think most everybody does. They finish their education and then they get their first real job. And I did that. I finished actually my first master's degree and went out into the corporate world and became a management consultant. And I worked with.
Wait, right out of college, you became a management consultant?
I did, yeah.
Ooh,
It was
snooze fest.
I know it was
I was
not
just like, ooh.
Yes, it was not that exciting. I worked on SKU rationalization and product procurement strategies.
Wow.
I know.
How long did it take you to say that without stumbling over the words?
Well, let's see. That was 30 years ago, so about 30 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
SKUs.
You know,
Does anyone recall SKUs? For the listeners out there, a SKU is like a QR code, but the original way that the UPC codes that we used to put on packaging so that we could follow inventory supposedly through its logistics trail. So look at me, I sound really smart.
I know. It seems like you may have had some SKU experience yourself.
The fearless road is a winding journey, and not all these roads are straight. So that's just fine with me. So
I have yet to take a straight road in my life. So
they're boring. They're good for speed.
They are. I will tell you, so I grew up in the Midwest, and there are mainly straight roads there. It's a very big grid system.
Yeah.
So if you see a road on a diagonal, you take it because it's faster. So any of the straight roads, I feel like, have no good stories, but those winding roads, those have the good stories.
Well, speaking of a good story, do you have an origin story for your fear? Like where it all began for you? Or do you look back at all and think of it that way? Like your relationship with fear?
So my relationship with fear, I didn't honestly discover it until like in my 20s, because I had some trauma as a child and I learned to dissociate. And I could basically get through anything and nothing would bother me. In fact, I didn't really embrace my fear until I was in my 50s. So yeah. So, but I didn't realize how disassociated I was until my 20s, because I separated my mind from my body so well that my kids like this story. I was living in London, and I was working in a part of the area that was not that great. And I was ending work a little late, I'll say 10 or 10:30 at night. It was dark out, and I was waiting for the bus stop. Or I was waiting at the bus stop for the bus.
For the trolley.
And as I'm
waiting for the trolley.
The trolley. Yeah. And as I'm standing there waiting, I can see out of the corner of my eye that there's 3 gentlemen kind of walking towards me. And I'm just standing there, minding my own business, just waiting. And they get up to me and they jump at me. And I stood there. I turned my head very calmly and looked at them, and I said, yes. They ran because they completely expected me to scream.
Yeah.
Because they thought they were going to scare me. I don't know if they were planning on doing anything, but they thought that I would at least have some reaction. And to not have a reaction freaked them out so much that they ran away, and they're like, what is wrong with that woman that she didn't, freak out?
Wow.
And but I was able to completely separate my physical reaction to anything from what was happening to me for
And
decades.
don't you think it's
And it
fascinating,
wasn't
like
in
that? I think a lot of us, and when we reach our 50s, and maybe this is just something that we do because it is part of our life's journey. Although I've examined certain things in my 30s and then I looked back in my 40s and stuff, but it was very different. Now I feel like I looked back at my coping mechanisms, even though they worked for me for so long. I began to examine the coping mechanisms I was using to get through life and begin to wonder what the patterns were there with my relationship with fear and how I was handling stuff. And it sounds like you had already developed a coping mechanism that allowed you to separate, at least temporarily, from the emotion of the moment.
Absolutely. And so it's interesting is I didn't even realize I was doing that.
Sure.
I had no awareness that that is what was happening as I was going through life. Because when I started doing it, I was at such a young age that I was using that coping mechanism to get through some sexual abuse. And basically, I would literally put in my mind, I was somewhere else, and what was happening to my body
Yes.
was not me.
Yes.
And so I completely separated, but I maintained that separation for a very long
I'm a
time.
fellow
In fact,
survivor myself
and
of that.
yep.
I think it's interesting because I can recall pretty with pretty great clarity the moments that this stuff took place. And it's a weird thing for me because, and I'm talking about the molestation when I was younger. Um, that was my babysitters that started it, and it was three sisters who played games, and I always thought it was a game. I always thought that it was supposed to be fun. I had no idea it was supposed to be full of shame and full of all of the harm and all that stuff, and I didn't know about that until much later. So there's a part of me that's kind of grateful that I didn't carry that burden of guilt and shame with me that would have been heaped on by other people's assumptions about your experience, you know, telling you that this is bad.
Mhm.
And this is one of those areas where, when you do a lot of reading about these things with either conversations with God or philosophical things where they go, nothing is good or bad, less thinking, make it so. And I feel like there's one of those places where there's an innocence that we carry with us until an adult tells you it's bad and you did something wrong, right? Up until that very moment, you probably don't carry too much unless you know differently. And maybe I didn't. I suppose I was too young to know differently, or at least it was shared with me in such a way that felt like it was supposed to be. We were having fun, you know, until years later. And I always
Mhm.
wonder if that's something that has such a massive impact on certain individuals about how they receive life after that, how they receive anything that they move forward into, if they're already starting out by carrying this loaded self of self-worth and guilt and shame that just sits there, you know?
Yeah, and I definitely did because I was raised in a very religious family. And so anything involving
Yep.
sexuality was not
Yep.
acceptable until marriage. And my abuser told me that one, no one would believe me. And the time that I
Yeah.
did try,
Yeah.
they were right. And so no, I definitely carried a lot of guilt and shame. And why was this happening to me? And why would nobody help me? And how can I get somebody to help me? And I was completely unsuccessful at making that happen. So I carried that with me for a long time. In fact, what I ended up doing was not only did I dissociate my mind and my body from some of those physical things, I actually
Ah.
suppressed the memory for a very long time until I was in college. And I was actually engaged to get married. And the story of that one is when the gentleman was asking me to get married, I didn't really want to, but I didn't know how to say no because
Yes.
I am a people pleaser. And so he came home, got down on one knee, said, "Will you marry me?" And I said, "Oh my God, oh 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 my God. And I literally kept going until he finally stood up and said, Janet, is that a yes? And I looked at him and I said,
Uh, I
sure.
think so.
And so, like, I mean, literally, I said, sure. It was horrible, absolutely horrible that that was my answer
Yeah.
because it should have been no. And had I respected myself and him enough, I should have said no, and I didn't. And as I was going through that year, um, as I was getting closer to the actual time, I'm like, I really need to call this off. I really need to call this off. And then one day I went to the mailbox, and there in my mailbox was a letter from a person I knew, but I'd never gotten a letter from before. And it was my abuser writing and
Whoa.
asking for my forgiveness.
Whoa. How did he
I
have
didn't
your address?
remember
He
it
was a family
happened.
member. He was somebody familiar with you.
He had my address. Yeah.
Oh my
I don't talk
gosh.
about who it was. So,
Well, no, but I
but
mean,
yeah.
talk
So,
about another insertion of violating your sanctity and your space. That had
yep,
to have like turned you upside down.
completely. And so I basically couldn't handle that and canceling the wedding. And so I ended up getting married, even though I shouldn't have. And
So the
we
part of
stayed
you that was
married for several years.
compartmentalizing decided, I'll just do the wedding part and I'll just shove
Yep.
that down even further.
Well, I was actually starting to deal with that, but it
Yeah.
was like I couldn't deal with that and cancel the wedding
Yeah.
because, there was just so much wrapped up in it
Yeah.
that I couldn't handle doing both things at the same time. So, yeah,
Wow.
it was a lot.
Jeez. That's that. Okay. So I'm assuming I didn't get through the whole book and I didn't get a chance to read thoroughly all that. Do you share this in there when you
Oh yeah.
talk about this? Oh
Yeah,
wow.
it's in there. Yep.
The the you say in there, I believe it's in the chapter on trauma, that
Mhm.
knowing that no one was ever going to read your story and judging yourself, that you released your fear and started writing. Can you share with us a little bit what that's like to release your fear and begin the journey of writing all this down?
So for me, when the way that this all ended up happening was after, so I went through kind of my early 20s. I had my career. I ended up getting married and having kids and becoming a stay at home parent. And then one day I found out my husband was having an affair and he wanted a divorce. And it just absolutely crushed me. And that was when I had to start dealing with everything
Yes.
because it wasn't the divorce that really crushed me. After I went through all of that, I realized it was the fact that I had decades of trauma piled up that I had never really dealt with, and I needed to start really dealing with them. And the way that I did that, I did a whole bunch of different things. I went to the doctor, I went to my therapist, I increased therapy, I did yoga, meditation, I went on walks, I have a dog, I had lunches with friends, all of the things they say that you're supposed to do. And I needed something more. And the way that that happened was I started journaling and I started
Mm-hmm.
working on reconnecting my mind and my body and learning that
Wow.
a lot of my response was simply because I couldn't acknowledge, I feared acknowledging what was happening and actually really engaging with it. And so I would talk about it with my therapist, but I wouldn't really let myself feel it. And so I kept hanging on to it. And so when I would write it, I would then figure out a way to physically express it. And that's a
Okay. So
no.
sorry to interrupt you there. It's the let me see if I can get into this space with you. That you are so practiced at the art of compartmentalizing and disassociating yourself from moments where you could or should or might need to be feeling something, that you're unaware that you're doing it. So how does one begin to recognize those moments when you're doing it, when in fact you're doing it so well that you don't know you're doing it. Like, it seems like you're in a loop or some, you know what I mean? Like, it could be very confusing or questioning yourself,
Yes.
right?
So it took that break of during the divorce where I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
eat, I couldn't sleep. I was a complete mess. And I just had to start digging into why. And when I really started to look at it and read about it and research it, I came across some research about the mind body connection. And to your point about how I had been doing it for so long, when I read about it, my first reaction was, "Pfft, yeah, right.
That's not
Who
me.
needs to do that?
I don't
I've
do
been
that.
going for 50 years and I am totally fine."
I'm in touch with
Yep.
my emotion.
Yep.
The
Exactly.
one.
So it's like, okay, when I started to really be honest about it, it's like, you know what? You've done a whole bunch of other stuff. Why don't you actually learn about this and see if it's something that can help you?
Okay.
And so I did. I went and learned everything I could about this concept, and there's a lot of science behind it. And if you couldn't tell from my first career, the exciting skew rationalization, I like logic, I like
Yes.
data, I like
Yes.
facts. I'm a
Yeah.
very emotional person, but I like that stuff. And I like that stuff because there's a solidity in it. There's something very exactly.
Dependability.
You can rely on it.
Reliability.
You can
Yeah.
recreate
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
You can depend on it.
Yeah.
And so when I went through this and I was looking for how to fix myself, um, I found the science very reassuring. And so I started to apply it in my own life. And I did that by writing about the events. And then, and again, it was just for me. This was never going to be for anybody else.
Hmm.
I wrote about them and
Right.
then I found ways to physically express them. And the one that I struggled the most with, well, there were two, but the main one was anger because I had a lot of anger in me, decades.
Oh, I bet you did.
And so I had to find ways to safely physically express that emotion. And so what I would do is I
Hmm.
would take what I had written and I'd start thinking about it. And then I would do something that would express that again in a very safe way. Some of the things I would do, I box. And so I have a punching bag in the basement, but it had to be,
Hmm.
it wasn't just exercise. It was linking that thought of the emotion and actually feeling that anger well up inside me as I then would start hitting the punching bag. Or another
Yes.
favorite one of mine is smashing something. And in the book, I actually give
Yes.
you the way to safely smash glass. After much trial and error, figured out the number of bags and pillowcases and things that you need to put around something in order for it to not fly everywhere.
If you've ever had ricochet therapy, my mother used to take, because I had anger issues too growing up. No, no wonder. Um, but we used to get, you could go to like Salvation Army or Goodwill and you could buy boxes of plates and china and stuff,
Mhm.
and we'd get this big black marker and we'd write on it, like whatever that particular anger was or that feeling was, or if it was a person that made you angry or an issue or whatever, and then we would smash them against the
Mhm.
back wall of the alley, by the house.
Your mom
And
was ahead of
God, it
her
was
time.
therapeutic.
It is so
It was
therapeutic.
very therapeutic.
And it's scientifically
But there's
proven that that is
blowback.
helpful.
Just be careful. Wear goggles.
Yes, exactly. Well,
Because
that's
things can shatter and fly. So just be
exactly.
careful.
You have to be very, again, very safely, how you safely release these emotions. And so I did that for everything that I had written about. And the
Wow.
other emotion that I really struggled with was full on sadness. I suppressed sadness, not quite to the degree that I did anger, but I still suppressed it. And so I learned to give myself time to just sit and cry about some things because,
Yeah.
like, when you go through a divorce or many other things, you need a grieving process to get through it. And so I had to let myself grieve not just that, but, in my childhood, the loss of the innocence that I never got to have. and a lot of other things that I went through that, it was just I needed to honestly let myself grieve them. And so I did. And I realized once I went through and did that and let
Mhm.
that physical expression take the weight off of my back, off of my mental load, that the memory wasn't gone, but its control of me did. It was gone. And so what I ended up,
Yeah. Its
its
influence over
influence.
you
Yeah.
seemed to just
And
dissipate.
I still
Yeah.
get sad. I still get upset about things, but it's not that, it's overwhelming type of thing. And it doesn't keep me up at night
Yes.
anymore. And I don't need to talk to anybody about it and feel like I need to deal with it. And so I realized after the way it kind of very long story here, sorry, came out is that
It's okay.
I on Facebook did the gratitude challenge. And every day for the month of November, I wrote what I was thankful for. But I didn't do stuff like, oh, I'm thankful for toilet paper and I'm thankful for indoor plumbing. I wrote things that were a little bit more personal. And, one of the
Mhm.
things that I wrote about was I'm thankful for tears because they allow me to release my sadness. And sometimes they actually reflect my joy. And then when they're gone, I know that that emotion has passed. And the last one that I did, I wrote about what my therapist said to me as I was going through this before I figured everything out. She said to me, Janet, tell me 3 things that you love. So I was like, okay, my friends, my family, my dog. Okay, tell me 5 things. I love nature. I love yoga. 10 things. And after I did the 10, she looked at me and she said, why aren't you on that list?
Ooh. Ooh, that's a good therapist.
Right?
Dang.
And you're like, oh,
Ooh.
darn it. It's almost like I failed the test. Darn it. Of course I should be on there. Dang it. But it really did. It's like you said, it's like it really makes you think, why am I not on my own list of things I love? Because I should love myself. And so when I got done with that and I shared a lot of things throughout that month, I had so many direct messages from people saying how thankful they were that I shared my story because a lot of people have been through a lot of the things that I've been through. I'm not the only one. Shocking, I know. I'm not that unique. Um, and the response I got was very inspiring because they were like, I feel seen, I feel heard, and I know that I am not alone. And
Wow.
so I realized that part of the reason why I could never have written my story earlier was because there was too much emotion inside of me to actually put it out in the world for anyone else to engage in. And since I had let it go, it had lost that hold on me. And I felt like if I put this out there and I talked about my story and I talked about what I learned about how we could actually do better in dealing with our emotions, that
Mhm.
it may help even one person. And so I did. I wrote a book. I wrote a book that's it's kind of broken into thirds. The first third is, I guess, pseudo my memoir. It's a very small sliver of my life, but part of my life. And then the middle third is all of the research that I did. And I actually ended up going back and getting another master's degree. And the book is based on the thesis that I had to write for that degree. And then thank you,
Wow,
the last
congratulations.
part of the book is
Mhm.
my proposal for how we can make systemic change in society in how we deal with and treat mental health in a much more proactive way. And I talk about Maya Angelou all the time because her quote, and I realize that this is not a direct quote, but what it's been turned into is now that we know better, we can do better. And we've learned so much
Yes.
about mental health in the last 20 years that we can do better now. And there's a lot of things we couldn't have done. We
We
should be
should
doing
be
better.
doing better.
Absolutely. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of stuff we
Yeah.
couldn't have done
Yeah.
even 5 or 10 years ago. But we have the technology.
Yeah, well, I would agree because I don't. Well, part of it I think is the technology. I think the other part of it, ladies and gentlemen, this is "Stop the Break" is the name of the book by Janet Barrett, our guest on the show. Um, Part of that, I believe, is our. Even in the '80s, we talked about, well, we have a therapist, and I'm good, and we're doing so great at discovering our needs, and you know, it still surprises me that this 40-year journey, we are still not good at taking better care of ourselves in the mental health and emotional department. That the very act of you describing your gratitude and leaving yourself off the list tells me that our understanding of love is an
Mm-hmm.
action we give away to others. It's something that we do for other people, an expression outside of ourselves, not something we do for ourselves. And I think that's so sad to me that we aren't doing better at communicating that and sharing that with our kids, with the next generation, with our doctors and our therapists, and that we're still in this sort of weird space where understanding and loving ourselves is such a big unknown, vast universe of like stuff. And I think that's where the fear comes from. I think because we haven't identified that kind of relationship, and we're not really in tune, and we're not in touch, that those fears creep in. That I'm a firm believer that most of the fears, and I'm not talking about clinical fears or psychological fears or phobias and things like that. I'm talking about the kind of fears that we tell ourselves about ourselves, the things that we say about ourselves when no one's around, the things that go off in our heads when we're trying to do, be, or have something new than what we currently are. And it's that self-doubt, that image of self-worth that creeps in. And I believe that because we are creatures of storytelling and our brains love to tell stories, that the future is always a massive unknown story. We're always moving through time, and we're always moving into the future, and the future is always an unknown. You just don't know how it's going to turn out. And I think partly because of that, our brains are constantly trying to project into that space what they think might happen or what they think is going to happen based on the little pieces of information and data that it currently has. And sometimes, if it's not enough, you get these wildly, what if scenarios that are bad, and things could turn out bad or whatever. These fear things that come up in your head that tell you you're not worthy of this, you didn't know enough, you didn't learn enough, you didn't teach enough, no one loved you, you were raped as a child, you were molested. I mean, look at your past. How do you think that you are worthy of doing any of these things, right? To me, all of that is just a version of your personality who's terrified of a future it doesn't know the answer to and can't see into far enough. And I think having these sessions like you're talking about, especially writing it down, I suppose, and exploring it further, is where we the person, the individual, answers that question for our fear, answers that question for that little child, that inner child that we're trying to take care of, that we're trying to reinvent a world and a safe life for. We need better tools and ways of filling in the end of our story confidently by saying, don't worry what happens, I got you, I'm always going to be here for you, I've got this, we're going to make things happen, we're going to make magic happen, and it's going to be incredible, the ride's going to be amazing, so don't worry. And I don't know that we do that. I don't know that we have that sort of self-talk, that we practice that as much as we practice the other, the
And
monkey
I
mind.
think the thing that compounds all of that is what we hear from the outside, especially as children.
Yes.
If you think about a child's reaction to anything, when they're young, it is a real, raw, emotional reaction. And if we don't like it, we tell that child to stop. If a kid throws a fit, the famous saying is, we get what we get and we don't get upset. And I actually had a conversation with a woman the other day where she said, oh, if she got upset in her house, her mom sent her to her room and locked the door and said, you are not allowed to come out until you can act like a lady. So she learned that
Wow.
what she felt naturally was wrong. And
Yes.
it's unacceptable.
Was unacceptable.
If you, for her, it was literally, if you want to be let out of your room and be with your
Yeah.
parent, you have to act the way that I tell you is acceptable. Even if it doesn't feel right for
Yes.
you, You have to follow that. And we still do that to this day. And we never really go back to kids and say, hey,
Yeah.
you had that reaction for a reason. Let's talk about that. And let's talk about why I said that. Because most often, I don't think that it is a negative reason why people say those pat phrases of, don't be a baby, act like a man. I believe that people are trying to give perspective to children where, if you get a paper cut versus cut off your hand, your reaction should probably be different. And some kids tend to
Sure.
overreact to those things. So it's like, all right, let's just make sure that we're on the correct area in the spectrum of reaction. But that's not what they hear.
Well, and I think as adults dealing with a child, like you said, they are in the rawest, most natural, space of feeling. Not the nuanced version, not the one that said, oh, I'm really feeling upset right now, but I'm going to set that aside for a minute so I can deal with what's in front of me. No, no, no. That's the
Mhm.
feeling, and it's up, and it's front and center, and it's live, and it's 100% active. It's not at 40%. It's not at 30%.
Yep.
It's 100% there. And I think as adults, we're like, whoa, like we don't know how to have 100% of our own feelings. We can't even own, let alone name 100% of our own feelings because we've treated them, some of
Yeah.
them, like redheaded stepchildren. We've treated them like things that don't belong here, aren't allowed to have a voice,
Mhm.
don't belong in the conversation. Just like with fear, we run from it, we shove it away, we turn it down, we want to destroy it, we want to conquer it, we want to kill it, all these different things. When fear, it's just simply an extension of your expression, just like joy, just like sadness, just like happiness. Fear is a part of you. And if we've spent so many years pushing it away and kicking it to the curb, it's no wonder that we find ourselves truncated at 50, wondering A, how we got here, B, why isn't my life better than what I thought it was, and C, how come I can't feel joy? How come I can't feel happiness? How come everything just
Mhm.
feels blah? And I'm just sort of floating, as you said, like, we're just
Yep.
surviving. We're
Exactly.
not thriving.
And we try to show those emotions that are acceptable. So to your point, like we try to show that we're happy. If
Yes.
anybody out there has
Yeah.
ever said to you, hey, how's it going? And you're fine, even though you weren't, like that's what we do. We can
Yeah.
only show those socially acceptable emotions. And yet,
Yes, fine for you, ladies and gentlemen. Cover your children's ears. Fucked up, insecure. What is it? Fucked up, insecure, neurotic, something or other. Like, yeah, exactly.
I
That's
actually
how I
never heard
feel.
that before. And now I
Like,
want to look it up.
yeah, yeah. It's like I was like, but my mom used to tell me. She used to say, "How are you feeling?" I said, "Fine." She goes, "Really? You're fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and something or other." And I'm like, "Oh God, I don't think I'm all those things." Well, then what are you? Let's pick a feeling, and I was like, oh, okay, let me think more about
It's
it.
true.
She was always so good at that, where she was like digging out of me. You're not going to hide behind one comfortable little pat
That's
response.
amazing.
You're going to need to own your
Yes.
feelings.
I have to say,
And
I
I
know
think that
your
was
mom isn't
cathartic.
around, but I wish I could have met her. She sounds like an absolute inspiration.
She taught me a lot. I think one of the biggest lessons in my life was when she abandoned me at the airport during Christmas, when I was coming home from college. Um, I was mouthy, abusive, disrespectful to her relationship, and I just hadn't. I hadn't. She was already changing. She had already been through the therapy. She was already making the changes post divorce. She was already doing the personal work on her journey, and I was stuck in this place of chaos that the family had adopted, where yelling at each other, screaming at each other, creating abusive scenarios was acceptable and tolerable. And she had moved on. And she was like, that's not going to happen. And if you can't learn to treat me with better respect, and my people in my home with better respect, you can stay at the airport for Christmas for all I care. And I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. But it was a great lesson. It was a
Mhm.
hard lesson, but it was real. You know what I mean? When a parent stops and says, no, enough is enough, and the kids not getting it, the teenagers not getting it, or whatever, sometimes we have to have that tough love moment where we're literally put in our place. And I had to sit there on a chair in the airport and think about what I'd
Mm-hmm.
done. And I really had to put the pieces together. It took me 6 months of not talking to her to finally get to a place where I was able to talk to her, because I was very
Yeah.
upset. But it took me a while to get past being upset to realize just what I was doing and how I was participating in the chaos and the emotional and verbal abuse
Yep.
scenario, in order to stop it. So
That
she was
that
great.
is an amazing lesson. I'm sure it was very hard for her to do as well.
Can you imagine that? What it must have felt like for her on Christmas, not having me there, and then and I didn't get to see that part of it, obviously, but I mean, I just can imagine she must have felt terrible and lonely, and without
Yeah.
her kid
But
there, like, but it's what
she
she
also
had to
respected
do for
herself.
herself to.
Yeah.
Yes, that self-love and self-respect was a big lesson for me to go, oh,
Hmm.
that's what that looks like. That's what self-love and self-protection and setting healthy boundaries actually looks like
Yeah.
in its expression,
Um,
right? So
I
that
used to
was
have
good. That was
somebody
a good
say to me,
lesson.
they're like, "How much are you willing to put up with?" Like literally the stuff that I know happens to you, how much are you willing to put up with? Because it seems absurd. And I was like, that's just how life is. And it's actually not.
Well, I think that's what
What's
we
that?
tell ourselves.
Yeah.
But no, but I think we tell ourselves that. I think those are the little mantras and the little statements and the little words we go, well, that's life, or I guess that's just the way things are
Yeah.
gonna be, or whatever that stuff is, right? Who's telling you this? Who's giving you these little bits, these nuggets of bad information about life? It isn't that way. It doesn't have to be that way. You can have a happier, better, more well-rounded and balanced existence, and you can show yourself love by enacting some of these things, having healthy boundaries, recognizing when you're in a comfortable situation and you don't want to be, telling other people what your preferences are. I mean, communicating to other people what your preference is for a situation or whatever. How many of us just don't? We abdicate that role where we don't go, oh, I actually don't like that. We just go, okay, whatever,
100% me. 100% me. I'm just like, yeah, sure, whatever you
Exactly.
want. I mean, I am much better now, but that was how I grew up.
Yep.
It was you just were if you wanted to be included and accepted, you did that. That's how I thought that's just how you had to be.
Well, so I talk about this a little bit on my speech too, and I say that we are rewarded for conforming. Our entire doctrination and school, from the moment we go to kindergarten on up, is nothing but a reward system for
Mhm.
conforming to standardized testing, conforming to outfits and wearing certain things, conforming to knowledge base, conforming to behavior patterns, conforming to expectations from others about whether or not you should fit in, not fit in, wear your hair this way, wear that outfit, do this, date that person, whatever it is. We are constantly being told we'll be rewarded if we conform. And what are we doing? We are ultimately taking our original authentic selves, and we're telling you, you don't have a right to be here. You don't have a right to exist. We're going to do something different. So I don't know what to do with you, but sit down over there and be quiet for a
Yeah,
few
you get
years,
punished
you know?
if you
And
don't conform. It's not
yeah,
even just that you get
exactly.
rewarded for conforming, you get punished for not conforming.
If you don't,
And and there's
that's very
never
true.
any grace for any options, you know? That's
No, there's no consideration for any
nope.
other
It's
options,
this is the way that it is,
you know?
and you have to abide by it. And sadly, I talk to my kids about how there's times when you should fight that, and there's times where it's not worth it to fight it. And the hard part is figuring out which is which.
True. I think, knowing the hill you're going to stand on, uh, is a good lesson also in life
Mhm.
to learn. I thought everything was a battle and everything was, I'm going to show them and I'm going to prove them wrong. And I did stuff just because people said I
Mhm.
couldn't do it. Like I was like, yeah, I'm going to show you. I mean, how much of my energy and my time did I waste doing stuff because someone said I couldn't do it? Now, did I learn a lot of things? Yeah. I mean, I gained a lot of skill sets doing stuff I wasn't probably 100% interested in, simply because someone said, you can't do that. And I was like, watch me. That beautiful, blissful ignorance, which is, afforded to youth, for some particular reason. We don't get it when we're older. Um, it is
Oh, we're still young.
we're still young, yes, but this is like, I talk about this, with, when I was sharing an origin story with from Mary Kay. I used to be a performer, a dancer many years ago, and I was performing for Mary Kay and her big conventions in Texas. And she has this story she tells about the bumblebee pendant that she wears. And I was escorting her on stage nightly, and we would stand backstage while she was getting ready or whatever to escort her on stage. And I always kept staring at that little bumblebee, and she's just like, are you looking at my bumblebee? And I was like, yeah, I mean, it's cute. It's a pendant. It's got lots of diamonds. I just don't get it. Like, what's the bumblebee about? And she tells the story about the bumblebee and how it's physiologically not supposed to be able to fly, but because it doesn't know that, the bumblebee flies anyway. And
Yeah, I
it
love that.
stuck with me for so long. And I realized, I was like, oh my God, I'm like a bumblebee. Like, I don't know that I can't do all these things. So I just go and do them, fail or fall or whatever. It doesn't matter to me, because I don't know that I can't. And so I just go and try. And I think that's a beautiful, magical spirit to hold on to. I don't know how many other people have that or experienced that. I was blessed because my parents were like, fly, where do you want to go? How far do you want to go? Like, try anything. And that was great to a degree, but it also lacked some structure, I think, in terms of guiding me down a set of, places where it was like, well, focus on one thing at a time. I was very sort of, a squirrel with it, for a long time.
I think we needed to combine our families because mine was figure out something safe that you are guaranteed. So I had to take college level typing in 6th grade because my mom said, well, you can be a
But I
secretary.
don't understand the statement, figure out something safe that can be guaranteed, when nothing in life is. And my gosh, the journey between
Well,
there
and if you
and
think
and
about,
and and, and the other side after college or after whatever, I mean, my God, anything can happen. It's not like you're guaranteed to get to be successful at it just because you pick something safe.
yeah, well, in the era that they grew up in,
Yes,
most people did lifetime
that's right.
employment.
That's right.
So my father's passed, he would be in his late 80s, and my mom is in her mid 80s. And so the era that they grew up in, it was lifetime employment. And at that point in time, women could be nurses, teachers, or
Right.
secretaries.
Right.
And apparently I wasn't going to be a nurse or a teacher, but my mom thought I could be a secretary because I don't know why. I don't know what skill I had.
Well, not with your passion for UPC codes. I mean,
Well, I clearly did
so
not follow that path, but I will tell you, my
right.
typing skills are out of this world. I can type
That
at
I'm
like
jealous of.
120 minutes a word. Yeah.
I wish I'd learned.
120 words a minute.
I'm a master hunt and pecker, but that means
Ah,
that I also have to have word spell on, because if I look up to the screen, all of the red lines, there's so much red. I have to go back and fix everything because I can't. I suck at typing. I have terrible handwriting too, and I always felt bad about that.
oh,
But
yeah, I do too.
all right, so I have another question for you. I want to dive in a little bit further for this book, ladies and gentlemen. Stop the Break, by Janet Barrett, which is out now. In chapter 2, this is a scary moment for you. You had a real scare where you felt your son came to you and uttered these terrifying words.
Mhm.
I think the world would be better off without me. And you go on to say that you felt this intense fear. You had lost a cousin, to suicide, and their parents were still dealing with it to this day. And you were terrified that he would kill himself, even though he didn't use those specific words. But your mind went there. And you tried to
Mhm.
comfort him by wanting to hold on to him tight and tell him that he's worthy and that he's a good person, and to let him know that he's loved and that the world wouldn't be better off without him. Now, I've had those thoughts so many times. And I think that's something that a lot of people face in their life, when there's these moments that you think, oh, the world would just be so easier, wouldn't it, if I wasn't here anymore? Can you
Mhm.
take us back into that moment as a parent, specifically, of course, but then when you heard those words, where were you? What were you thinking? What happened?
So my excuse me, my son, I can't remember, he was 9 or 10 at the time. He came to me and did exactly what you said. He said, "Mom, I think the world would be better off without me." And my world completely stopped in that
I would
moment.
imagine.
And I don't know how, because I don't remember expelling my breath, but all of a sudden I had no breath. But I also had to be his parent, even though I was scared. He needed me to be strong. And so I hugged him and I'm like, why do you say that? Nobody, of course not. And as I was going through it, I realized this was something that was bigger than anything I could possibly deal with on my own. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. And so I ended up contacting a therapist and said, "This is what's happened." And unfortunately, because as you said, I had lost a cousin to suicide. And sadly, since then, I've had several friends whose children have also died by suicide. And I had no idea if that's what he was thinking, what he wasn't. I didn't know at the time that it's okay to talk to any of your kids about
Hmm.
suicide. And by saying that word to them, it won't make them more or less likely to
It
actually.
doesn't. It doesn't open the door.
It does not open the door. It doesn't close the door. It doesn't do
No,
anything. It's simply a
no.
conversation. But I didn't know that.
Well,
And
and the
so,
thing too, I think on this is that, kids are also learning language.
yeah.
They're learning how to express themselves in a world where words don't make sense. And by the way, the English language is the worst. I
Oh my
mean,
gosh.
the way we use words in the English language, certain words mean this and certain words mean that. They both sound exactly the same. A
Yep.
child trying to figure that out and then also learning to express their feelings and their emotions about their place in this world might say, I think the world would be better off without me. I would wonder what experiences he had had up to that moment that got him to that conclusion. That he understood
So
enough to make that statement.
the therapist that ended up working with him, he
Hmm.
called me 2 or 3 weeks after he started with him. And he said, "Janet, I think I know why he said that to you."
Oh.
I was like, "Oh my gosh, please, why? What was it? What can we do?" And he was like, "Because he thought that the bad thoughts he had about other people, that he was the only person that had those thoughts." Now, the bad thoughts that he had
Uh-huh.
were like, "I hate my brother. He's a jerk."
Right.
Or "That person cut me off. They're, gross," or what. This is a 9-year-old kid. So, like, the kind of language that they had. But he thought nobody else had those thoughts, that he was the only one in the world. And because of that, he shouldn't be here. He had no idea.
Wow. I mean, I get it. I totally understand. I totally get it. Like, he's very sensitive apparently, and it feels very
He is,
empathic to some degree.
he is,
Um,
he is a complete empath. And I
but
said to
he's
him, like,
measuring his feelings, like he's measuring them against
other
how it,
people.
how it might affect other people if he feels this way.
Hmm.
It's so
And
advanced.
I will say, until I went through this with him, and I'm, I guess I'm proud to admit it and not proud at the same time, I don't think I ever really realized that everybody has those thoughts. I
Oh,
never
well,
took the time to sit and just realize that. Intellectually, yeah, but if you don't actually sit through it and have that cognitive awareness,
yes.
like, it's hard to go through and be like, "Oh, you're right. Everybody does." And if
Well,
somebody
I mean,
doesn't tell you
as a
that, how are you
kid,
supposed to know?
exactly. I mean, we live in our own heads. We have no
Mhm.
grasp or understanding for how other people feel, think, or behave. We only
Yep.
see them through a very set of specific filtered lenses and experiences that are afforded us by our family, our family home, and our world, right? And then, if go out a step further, the media that children could consume, movies, TV shows, things like that, don't necessarily ever share the perspective of a kid going through this stuff. Like, I don't know that it's actually, I mean, unless it's an after school special, I don't know that we would have encountered what other kids are thinking. I think I was blessed because I
Mm-mm.
didn't care. I was one of those self-absorbed children. I'm still self-absorbed. People will say that, I'm sure. But like, but I never thought about what other people thought. And that didn't occur to me until much, much later. So I love that he was so sensitive to that, being concerned about his thoughts being damaging in
Mm-hmm.
some way in it to the world. I mean, his understanding of
Mm-hmm.
the world was such a small space, and yet he could think that his impact and his presence there was not a good thing because he was having bad thoughts.
Yep, exactly. It was it was a relief to get that information. But then I also realized, and that's part of what ended up driving me to this and talking to people about it, is we don't tell kids that. We don't even, like adults, to your point, adults don't acknowledge it.
Yeah.
I heard this statistic, and I'm not a big statistics person. Um, Even though I do like data, I don't relate to statistics on a personal level. But I heard this statistic. I love true crime podcasts. And
Yes. Hello.
oh yeah, I'm
My favorite
obsessed.
murder. Shout out.
And they, oh, that's so
I
good.
know.
Sorry. Okay.
We digress.
They had this statistic, and I can't remember specifically which podcast it was, but that over 50% of the people will report, so they will admit to this, that they have thought about how they would kill someone else. Not that they'd actually do it, but like, would you run them over? Would you stab them? Would you shoot them? 50% of the people admit that they have had some thought about that. Not that 50% have done anything bad or anything, but just simply had the thought.
I think if you can see my
And I
face on camera
realized,
right now, it's because I'm trying to recall whether or not I had those thoughts. I've thought about myself thousands of times,
yeah,
all the different ways. And I'm so
mm-hmm.
self-absorbed that I can't harm this. I want to remain pretty, and I don't know how. I don't like bleeding, so I can't do
You're
that.
past the ugly baby
I
stage, so you are totally keeping it.
right, like it's so funny that I would have these thoughts about, like, I would be better off dead, and then go, well, I wonder how I would do it, and then go through all the processes of thinking, ooh, but that's going to be too hard. You know what? I only think of it. What if I throw up? Well, I don't like that at all. Nobody wants to drown, so you know what I mean. Like, I literally go through the steps, but when it comes to thinking about whether or not I wanted to kill somebody, I've had those feelings where I'm like, oh, I want to kill you, and like, you know that. But I don't know that I've ever thought, would I lay out the plastic? Would I use a butcher knife? Would I, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think it's
Yep.
ever occurred
And
to
I
me.
don't think it's like they don't get to the real details, but it's more like you're like, oh my gosh, you know, I would do something and this is what I would do.
50%.
And I think what 50%, so to me, what was crazy was that 50% of the people actually
Yeah.
admitted to it, which to me, knowing statistics, there's more.
Oh,
There's a lot
yes.
more people that probably
Yeah.
have thought, even if it's, just a passing, fleeting thing, people have those bad
Well,
thoughts.
it's very Ally
It's
McBeal with
not
those
the
little dreamy
thought.
moments where you're like, you're like at the behind
Oh
your
my
car, you're like,
God, I miss Ally
I would, oh
McBeal.
no, I'm not going to run you over, I promise. But boy, do I want to.
Oh, there's times you're like, wouldn't that just be, oh, sorry. Whoops, I didn't see them there.
Do
I
over.
swear. Um, there's a meme out there that it's showing somebody that sees their ex, and they say to the person next to them, the meaning of I'd hit that has really changed over time for me.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. I used to call them throat punch Thursdays, because I'd be like, don't today, because it's throat punch Thursday and I will punch you in the
Yeah.
throat. Like, I've
Mm,
had those moments, but
yeah.
I did that. Okay. I'll have to
Yeah.
remember.
But it's not the thought though. And that's what I keep telling my kids. I'm like, having those thoughts, totally
Oh my
normal.
gosh.
It's acting
If
on
we
the thought.
responded, and I'm not disparaging your son for, the way he responded to his thoughts and thinking that we would be better off,
Yeah.
but if we all responded to our thoughts that way, my God, the number of thoughts we'd have. I mean, I'd be a cocoon, like wrapped up in a hospital somewhere if I reacted that actively to all of the fleeting concepts and thoughts that enter this thing on a daily basis, let alone and throughout my life. Thank God for
Oh,
journaling, and
yeah.
thank God for programs like this where I get to, like, spill it out and get it out in front of me so that it's not in here, working away and, planting seeds and creating toxicity in my life. I really believe that that's key. I think there are people that push it down, shove it down, pack it up, you know, and I think the body has a physical response. I think you manifest enzymes and proteins and chemicals that your body wouldn't normally do when you do that to yourself. And did you experience physical response to your compartmentalizing? Your
Oh yeah. So in second grade, I had ulcers.
What? In second grade?
What second grader has
Wow.
ulcers? And then I started having dizzy spells, and I I went through a lot of different, very odd
Mm-hmm.
illnesses. The last one that I had, I was in a situation that was very stressful to me, and I was probably 47 at the time. And I apologize if this is too much information for your audience. But I had my period and I started
Yes.
hemorrhaging. And my brother is a doctor. And I mean, literally, I had to stand in the shower because I couldn't get out of it and
Right.
go anywhere. And I talked to my brother and he said, Janet, that's your body telling you you have too much stress. You have to go deal with that.
What's interesting that he knew that about you in that
Yeah.
moment,
And
that you had internal bleeding
uh-huh,
just from the amount of
the amount of
stress that
stress.
you were
And
going
I
through.
mean, I could go through my entire life and list out all of the things that I had. But yeah, the start was the ulcers in second grade, and the
Wow.
end was internal bleeding. And since I've finally dealt with all of that and released all of those emotions in that physical way, because they do know scientifically that that is very important to do, and so many therapies have come out of it. I actually just listened to this amazing podcast with the guest. It was Ginger. Oh shoot, she's a burlesque dancer, but she's also a dance therapist. So she
Oh,
is a certified psychological therapist, and
yes.
the her specialty happens to be in dance. So
Yeah.
we have come up with various forms of therapy. There's EMDR, there's tapping, there's dance, there's a whole bunch of different areas within psychology now that use physical expression to actually release all of your stress and your emotions. And we're
That's
beginning to
fascinating.
understand how critically important this is to do.
Yes.
And that's because I kept trapping all of mine. My
Hmm.
body is like, okay, you've kept so much in there. We got to release it somehow. So, hey, guess what?
Yeah.
You get ulcers. And then,
Yeah.
I got canker sores. At one point in time, I had 15 canker sores in my mouth when I was in seventh grade.
My
And I can
gosh.
remember it like it was so painful, but I couldn't do anything about it
No,
because
your
there was
body was
no,
wanting to speak its truth and your
yep,
mouth was physically responding.
my body was like, okay, we're screaming at you.
Yeah.
But because I had so disassociated, I never paid any attention to it. It was
Wow.
just, oh, this is what my body is going to do now. Woo, this is
I have a
fun.
guest that's coming on the show. I think it's next week. Uh, that Kat Lakohi, who is a burlesque dancer, her speaking platform and her workshops do exactly the same thing, where she uses the art form of burlesque and the art form of performance to help people get more in tune with their bodies and their fears and their inadequacies, by allowing them to place it in this persona that gets to reenact this moment. And I think it's just so amazing, and it's brilliant. I think it's such an incredible experience. um,
Yeah,
I
I
got to
finally
do it
remembered
because
her
I
name.
was a
Sorry, it was,
performer,
well, I was going to say you were a dancer, like a legitimate dancer.
Yeah,
And
so I had that
yeah,
physical release. I had the opportunity. In fact, this is interesting that when I was raped at 16, um, I the very next morning was overnight, and I got drugged, and he dumped me out in the back of a 7-Eleven behind a dumpster. and it was like near my school. But I managed to get dressed and get to school that morning, and I was obviously hungover and recovering from this experience or whatever. But I wore my black trench coat and my hair was down. I was very, emu, before emu was emu. I think it was goth, we called it back then. I don't remember.
Yes.
This is the 80s. But my first class that day was my theater class that had an assignment where you had to come to class with a prop and you had to build a character around a prop. And lo and behold, for me, I got called up, of course, immediately because I was running late, to present myself in front of the class. And their job was to interrogate me, was to question your character and to find out things about your character. And I sat down in this chair, and I'm, with the chair was backwards. You know how you sit down and you sit on the chair,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, I am sweating profusely. Drugs, I'm sure, coming out of me left and right from being, drugged the night before. And I'm just sick. I want to throw up. And I pull out of my pocket this bottle of pills, and I look at it. I can't think, make a sentence, let alone do much of anything. Well, this is the 80s, late 80s, where teen suicide was a huge deal. This was going around everywhere. All the kids jumped on it immediately and began asking questions about what the pills were for. What's the bottle for? What are you planning on doing? Da 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 da. And
Mm.
I vomited the entire experience in front of them. I told them from top to bottom what I could remember, because I woke up in the middle of it after being drugged. I woke up in the middle of it twice trying to stop.
Oh my
And
God.
I described everything in great detail as much as I possibly could, just spitting it out through this persona of this individual in this theater class. And the teacher had to stop the class. Kids were crying. I ran to the bathroom, threw up like whatever was in my stomach. Um, but the weirdest thing, or the most brilliant thing about that, was the cathartic release of that moment for me, being able to immediately release my responsibility and shame for what had happened in public to everybody. Immediately placed that experience over there and me over here. And I was able to distance myself from it. And I didn't carry the weight. I didn't carry the scars. I didn't carry the shame. Um, and it was so cathartic. And I think a piece of me knew that. I think a piece of my brain latched on to that process. And from there forward, anytime I had a moment, a tragedy, thing that happened in my life, somehow I went, boop, I'm going to spit it out. I'm going to throw it over here. And then I'm going to turn and pivot and become something else immediately. Um, and that's a sort of a form of dissociation, I suppose. It's a sort of a form of placing the responsibility and the action on something other than yourself, or a version of yourself, if you will, that can carry that for you, and then
Mm-hmm.
you get to move on and reinvent yourself and be, ooh, I'm fresh and new. You know, I find it fascinating. But that was my, I don't know, release, having that release, like you talk about,
Mm-hmm. I say I had a therapist once say something to me that made me feel really good, because I had a lot of, I don't know if shame is the right word, but it's probably the easiest word, over how I got through the ways that I was able to cope with what
Mm,
happened to me. And my therapist looked at me and he said, whatever you had to do to get through is okay.
wow.
End of
So that was
sentence.
a part of you was telling
And
yourself,
so I,
why didn't you know better? Why didn't you do better? Why didn't you, like, were you like judging the very act of coping, that those skills helped you survive?
right.
And now you were feeling some sort of guilt or
Yep.
responsibility for the coping.
Yes. Because like I drank, I did a lot
Wow.
of stuff that were unhealthy
Yes.
behaviors, but it allowed me to actually get through the situation. And I have to say, him saying that to me was so impactful in my parenting, because now when my kids come to me, and I've had a couple of them tell me about friends that are using more destructive behaviors. A friend that, I learned a new word. He was turned. And that apparently means you're drunk and
Oh,
high. And I was like, oh, okay, like had to learn that word, but they came to me and I had to explain to my kid, I'm like, they're not doing that simply to be drunk and high. They're using that to
Right.
cope with something. I don't
Right.
know what it is. I have absolutely no idea, but there is not a kid out there that isn't doing that for some reason. Maybe it's because they feel the need to fit in. Maybe it's the need to forget something, or like there's a million things out there. But I said, don't judge how they're getting through what it is. Try and help them figure out what it is they're trying to get through and find a different way to do so. And having that
Hmm.
conversation with my kids has allowed them to come to me about a lot of things, which I love.
Well, it's
But
interesting
it's,
because I think, we, as a society, one of the things we learn to do, not just judging ourselves, we learn to judge other people
oh,
based on
yeah.
a certain set of small criteria. And all of a sudden, we think we know what that person's doing or why they're doing it, or that they shouldn't be doing it at all. And we make some kind of
Or,
judgment about it.
or what one of my kids said is like, well, what could possibly be wrong in their life? I'm like,
Bless.
literally, I could name 5 million things and I still probably wouldn't cover them all.
Yeah.
Like, but you don't see it. Like, that's the thing is you don't know what's going on. So don't assume nothing is going on because you think you know.
Well,
Assume something is going on.
I guess a beautiful way of tying that back together for your son might be, just like you didn't know that all the thoughts in your head that you're having, other people are having the same thing. They have that relationship with their thoughts, and those thoughts can sometimes drive them a little crazy, and they can have, when they need to
Mhm.
deal with it, sometimes we don't deal with it well. And as a result,
Yes,
they may experience this. So,
exactly.
well, I would love to keep going because we've been going for a while, and I would love this, but I want to get to a couple other things before we wrap this up. We have to have an episode
Yes.
2. Um,
I say we're going to have a two-parter.
we are. I know. It's like there's too much to dig into here. This is so much good stuff. I may have to break this up into 2 episodes. Um, so you're on a journey as a female entrepreneur. You're an
Mhm.
author. You're a public motivational speaker. Do you have, or have you developed what you consider to be a philosophy on entrepreneurship?
Huh. Um, no. To be
Good
completely
answer.
honest, I do not have a philosophy on entrepreneurship. What I tend to believe, because I actually had another company before this. I was an interior designer for a while, and I was actually very successful at it. But long story, ended up deciding to have kids and blah blah blah. So, but similar to how you were talking earlier about nobody told me I couldn't.
Yes.
That's kind of what this is it's not that anybody said, oh, you can't possibly do that. It was more like, well, yeah, sure, I can do it. I feel like entrepreneurs have this ability to be like, well, you know what, other people have done it. I can do it too. I can have my own company. I
Right.
can I can write a book. And I've done that in a lot of the parts of my life. I mean, I kind of joke most of the things that I did in parenting. I kind of looked at it and thought, okay, how many people before this have given birth? I should be able to handle this. Just putting it out there. Or breastfeeding. A lot of people have figured it out before
Right.
me. I think I will be able to figure it out. And by having that
Hmm.
mindset, it's really helped me be like, you know what? You can do it. And if I fail, I'm okay because I've lived with very little. Like I can remember having to literally count pennies to be able to eat. And, I tell the story of I was in Europe and I would have to hide from the train conductors because I didn't have enough money to pay for the fares. And I'm like, you know what? I know I will be able to
Wow.
survive. It will not be the life I have right now, but I will still be able to survive, even if it fails. And so I think for me, that's what allows me to do the entrepreneurial thing.
I think the
Um,
reason why
and probably a lot of stupidity.
I think we all have a little bit of that. I just enough. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The reason
Yep.
I asked that question is I think that today's definition of entrepreneurship is this highly competitive um, space where success is being defined by the amount of money you have, the mansion you live in, the cars you drive, the private jet that you got, and all these things entrepreneur do. And I want the fearless road that explores entrepreneurial journeys to realize that success isn't a measurement of those material items, but more a measurement of the journey that you've taken to get where you are. That success can be found and be had and be defined by enjoying, embracing, and relishing in those moments where we don't fail, we learn. We fall, we might not succeed specifically, right? Something may not come to fruition,
Yeah.
but out of that journey comes all of the other things we bring with us. And that is not a failure. That is a massive, massive success. And for those of us that are on the journey currently, doing it, then kudos to us and kudos to everybody out there listening. These are the small victories and these are the wins and these are success. You are successful, and it can be found and it can be had. My guest with us today is Janet Barrett. Stop the Break is the book that she has that's out right now. You can get it on Amazon. It's been a joy sharing this time with you and talking to you. Do you have 3 things you'd like to leave? Actually, I'm going to ask for this a little differently. One is, give me 1 challenge you face and 2 things you want to leave the audience with. How about that?
Okay. So the challenge that I face is keeping myself honest with all of the things that I now know.
Ah,
So, what I mean by that in a little more detail is when I had to finally admit to myself that I was scared, my fear is facing my emotions. When I finally admitted I had to do that to truly become healthy,
mm-hmm.
I did it. And I went whole hog. I went through all of that really intense. But life doesn't stop and
No.
stuff keeps happening.
Yes.
And I have to keep myself honest and keep doing this process because when I don't, it impacts my ability to really thrive in life. And so that's why I say, like, there's the
Yeah.
surviving, which I did for years. And now I'm actually thriving. And I had a very small example of that the other week where I got something in the mail and I'm on the board of something, and there was an invitation that came out, and I'm on the committee that was sending out the invite. And so all of the committee's names are on there. And my name was the only one that was a single person. All of the other ones were
Ah,
couples. And it was the first time that it really hit me that I don't have a partner. And in some ways, I'm in the minority, especially in this particular
mm-hmm.
instance. And that was hard. I didn't create the life with my 4 children without a partner. And now here I am. And it just really hit me and it made me really sad. And I ignored it. And it kept bugging me. And it would wake me up at night. And finally, I sent a text to one of my friends. And I said, I had something really stupid just make me sad. And she called me right away.
Yes.
And she's like, what is going on? Like, and I told her, and I started bawling as I'm talking about it and I'm expressing it. And I let it out. And then guess what? I was fine. I'm totally fine. Like I moved on, but for several days it stayed in me because I didn't really fully own the fact that I needed to release that sadness. And I have to keep myself honest. And that for me is the thing that is the challenge that I face every single day.
Yes.
So the 2 things that I want to leave your listeners with is one of the ways that I keep myself honest is I have a list of things that I call my warning signs.
Mm.
So the way that I know that I'm not being honest with myself, I have some physical signs that I now know to pay attention to. One is my shoulders tense up. I get headaches. I um I just have a variety of things that happen. My stomach starts to get upset. And so I've listed out all of those things. I also have what I call activities that I do. Most of them involve social media. I'm scrolling through, I'm spending way too much time. It also involves me avoiding people. I'm an introvert by nature, and so I will avoid people. So I literally have printed out here and it's attached to my computer because I sit here all day long. And there's a list of things that I know if I start to see them happening, I'm avoiding something. I'm not being honest with myself. And so I would encourage everybody here to actually do that, to come up with a list of things that you know you do when you're avoiding dealing with your life and your emotions. And if you keep it someplace that you see, it will help keep you honest. So that is one thing that I
Well,
would leave them with.
self-love is a practice.
Yes.
And by the way, everybody, you got here down your fearless road, down this road to this moment, practicing all the other coping skills and mechanisms that we've used to avoid dealing with life, to avoid dealing with emotions, to avoid dealing with fear, to avoid dealing with a lot of things, because that's how we coped.
Yeah.
And it's okay. It's
Yep.
absolutely okay.
It is.
But today we know better and we can do better.
Thank you, Maya
And
Angelou.
make your list. Yes, thank you,
Exactly.
Maya Angelou. Make a list of love for yourself, ways to sort of some self-care, and check in with yourself regularly because it's important. And if you need to check in with us, you can check in with us at thefearlessroad.com. If they want to check in with you, Janet, where do they find you?
You can find me on my website at janet-barrett.com. And all of my connections are there. So if you want to follow me on any socials, you can find all of the links there.
Yes, and of course we will put the links down below when you see this. It has been an absolute joy and a pleasure for me. I am so excited to have had you on the program today to share your journey with us, your fearless journey on the Fearless Road podcast. I definitely think we're going to have episode 2. We need to revisit this because there's so much more to dive into and to dig into and to share. But audiences, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today, with your blessed time, your ears, your listening. As I've said before, there are no new words, but there are new ears to hear. And we hope that this has helped you on your fearless road. Thank you again, Janet Barrett.
Thank you.
Stop the Break. It's out on Amazon.
Thank you so
Be
much.
fearless. You're welcome.